Eleanor Sutcliffe sat in the pew her husband had paid rent on for 22 years, and she heard her own name read aloud from the pulpit. On the charity list. For coal she could not buy that winter. She did not lower her eyes. The vicar read on. He said it was so the subscribers might know their charity was not wasted. 14 of them sat thanked by name in the front pews, and the whole congregation turned, one by one, in a village where every name has a face. 4 Sundays later, she wrote 3 letters, 1 to the diocesan chancellor, 2 to the subscribers. She posted none of them. What she did instead emptied her pew by Advent. If you have ever had to accept help in a way that was built to be watched, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe and tell me in the comments what city you are watching from. I like to know where these stories travel. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. The village was called Nettlehome. It sat on the edge of the fen in Lincolnshire, and this was the year 1875. It was not a large place. A church, a green, a scatter of cottages, a chapel across the water for those who leaned that way. The land was flat and wet, and the wind came off it hard in November. Everybody knew everybody. That is the thing you must hold in your mind. There were no strangers here. When a name was spoken, a face rose with it. Thomas Sutcliffe had taught the village its letters for 22 years. He was the schoolmaster. He had taken the small children when they could barely hold a slate, and he had given them back to their families able to read a Bible and write a name and add a column of figures. 2 generations had passed under his hand. Men who now farmed the fen had learned their alphabet from him. He was not a rich man. Schoolmasters never were, but he was respected, and in a place like that, respect is a kind of wealth. Every year, Thomas paid £1 4 shillings for pew number 9. It was near the back. It was not a grand pew, but it was paid every single year for 22 years. He never missed. A man who paid his pew rent was a man who stood on his own ground in the house of God. He owed nothing there. He sat where he sat by right, not by favour. That mattered to Thomas. It mattered more than he ever said. And it mattered to Eleanor. She had been his help all those years. She had heard the children through their reading when his voice gave out. She had kept his accounts in her head, because she was quick with figures, quicker than he was. She was literate in a full and easy way that many wives of her time were not. She could read anything put before her. She could read a ledger as fast as a page of scripture. Remember that. It will matter more than you think. On the shelf in their front room stood 3 books. A spelling primer, its cover soft from handling. A copybook, where Thomas had practiced a fair hand as a young man. And a small testament, the print tiny, the leather gone dark. 3 books among others, but these 3 he loved. Eleanor dusted them without thinking. They were simply part of the room, part of the life. Then came the bad year. It began with the potato patch, the patch behind the cottage that they leaned on quietly, the way poor households lean on the ground they own. It failed. The blight took it, black and stinking, and there was nothing to lift from the earth that autumn. That alone would have been hard. It was not the whole of it. That winter Thomas fell ill. It was his chest. It had troubled him for years, but this time it settled deep and would not lift. He lay in the back room through the cold months, and the doctor came, and the doctor's bills came after him. Eleanor sold small things, a clock, a good shawl. She kept the house warm for him as long as the coal held. She sat with him through the long nights when the fen wind pushed at the window. He did not get up again. He died at the very end of the winter, when the first green was just showing in the hedges he would not see. And then there was the funeral to pay for. A schoolmaster is buried decently or not at all in a village where everyone will come to look. Eleanor buried him decently. She paid for it, and when it was done, she sat at her kitchen table and counted what was left, and it was very little. Here is the hard fact you must understand. A schoolmaster in 1875 left no pension. There was nothing. No fund, no provision, no quiet monthly sum to keep his widow. That would not come for another 20 years and more. Thomas had given the village 22 years of his life and his lungs, and when he died the account simply closed. Eleanor was left with a cottage, 3 books she would not sell, and the memory of a man who had never once been in debt. 1 failed patch, 1 long illness, 1 funeral. That was all it took. A whole ordered life, and it emptied in a single year. Now, you must love her by now. I hope you do, because I want you to feel what comes next the way she felt it. There was in Nettlehome a charity. It was called the Nettlehome Clothing and Coal Charity. It was old. It had 14 subscribers, and each of them gave a guinea a year, and with that money the charity bought coal and cloth and distributed it each November to the poor of the parish. Blankets, flannel, sacks of coal against the coming cold. It was, on its face, a good thing. It kept people warm who might not have been. That is true, and I will not pretend otherwise. But the charity had a custom, an ancient one. Nobody living could remember it beginning. After the distribution was arranged, on a Sunday in November, the vicar would read the names of the recipients aloud from the pulpit. After the sermon, before the whole congregation. So that, as the words of the trust put it, the subscribers might know their charity was not wasted, and the same Sunday the subscribers themselves were thanked, by name, from the front. The 14 of them sat in the good pews near the altar, and their names were spoken with gratitude, and they inclined their heads and were seen. Eleanor had heard this reading every year of her married life. Every single year. She had sat in pew 9 and listened to the poor of the parish named, and she had listened to the subscribers thanked, and she had never once thought about it. Do you understand? She had never turned it over. She had never asked herself what the reading was for, or what it did to the ones whose names were read. It was simply a thing the parish did in November, like the harvest supper or the ringing of the bells. She could have taken it apart in a minute if she had ever cared to. She read ledgers. She kept accounts in her head. She understood, better than the vicar himself, how every part of an arrangement fits to every other part. She had all the understanding she would ever need to see straight through the whole custom to the machine underneath it. But she had never looked. Why would she? Her name would never be in it. She had listened to the reading for years without once imagining her own name among the read. That was the year that changed. The relief committee met, as it did each autumn, to decide who the coal and cloth would go to. It was a small committee. It was headed by the vicar, the Reverend Josiah Crandall. And Mr. Crandall was not a cruel man. I want you to hear that clearly, because the truth is worse than cruelty. He was a careful man, a tidy man, a man who liked his accounts to balance and his subscribers to be content. He believed in the charity. He believed the reading was a kindness. He believed that to be named for relief was to be publicly cared for, held up by the parish, not cast down by it. He never once, in all his years, imagined it any other way. And the committee, going down the list of the parish poor, came to the widow Sutcliffe. Her patch had failed. Her husband was dead and unpensioned. She had buried him, and there was nothing left. Of course she should have coal. Of course she should have a flannel petticoat against the fen winter. It was the obvious, the Christian, the kindly thing. They put her name down without a second thought. Coal and clothing. It took perhaps a minute. The note came to her door on a grey afternoon. A boy brought it. It told her, in the vicar's neat hand, that the committee in its charity had listed her for coal and a garment of flannel, and that she might expect the distribution in the usual way that November. It was meant well. Every word of it was meant well. Eleanor read it standing in her doorway. She read it once. Then she folded it and put it in her apron, and she went back inside, and she did not weep and she did not rage. She set the kettle. She was very still, and somewhere in that stillness, for the first time in her life, she began to look at the custom she had heard every year, to take it apart, to see the machine. She understood, standing there with the kettle warming, exactly what the reading would do. She understood it the way she understood a column of figures. Her name read from the pulpit her husband had rented ground beneath for 22 years, in a room where every name has a face. And the subscribers thanked, 2 names later, inclining their heads to be seen. She could see the whole shape of it now. She had simply never turned to look before. She said nothing to anyone. The November Sunday came. It was cold and bright, the light thin and hard the way it is over the fen in late autumn. The church filled. It filled the way it did for the great days, because everyone knew the reading was coming and everyone came to hear it, though no one would have said so. The subscribers took their places in the front pews. Mrs. Arabella Fenwick among them, in her good dark coat, sitting where she could be seen and where she could see. She was the chief of the subscribers. She gave more than a guinea, and she made sure it was known. Her charity was a thing she wore, like the coat. Edmund Hartley was there too, in the subscribers' pews. He was a corn factor, a plain and decent man, well liked. He gave his guinea because he was a Christian, and because it was expected, and because, if he was honest, he liked to be seen as a good one. He had never examined the reading either. He sat and waited for it with an easy conscience. And at the back, in pew number 9, sat Eleanor Sutcliffe, in black, her husband dead less than a year, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight. The Reverend Crandall preached his sermon. I do not know what it was on. It does not matter. The village half listened, the way a congregation does, waiting for the part they had come for. And when the sermon was done, Mr. Crandall did not step down. He drew out a paper, and he began to read the names. He read the recipients of the Nettlehome Clothing and Coal Charity. He read them plainly, kindly, in his tidy voice. So many sacks of coal to this family, a blanket to that widow, flannel to those children. And he said, as the custom required, that the list was read so the subscribers might know their charity was not wasted. The names went down the paper. And then he read, Eleanor Sutcliffe, coal and clothing. The congregation turned, not all at once. That is the thing I want you to see. One by one. A head here, then a head there. The small movement passing back through the church like wind through standing corn, until the whole room had turned to look at pew number 9. Every face she knew, the mothers of children her husband had taught, the men who had learned their letters at his knee, all of them turning to look at the schoolmaster's widow on the charity list. 2 names later, the vicar came to the thanks, and he thanked the subscribers. He thanked Mrs. Arabella Fenwick by name for her especial generosity, and Mrs. Fenwick, in her good dark coat, inclined her head. Gently, gracefully, to be seen giving. In the same breath, in the same room, in the same minute, the woman was thanked for her charity, and the widow was named as its object, and the whole village watched both. And Eleanor Sutcliffe sat in the pew her husband had paid rent on for 22 years. And she did not lower her eyes. She looked ahead, at the altar, past the turned faces, past the inclined head. Her back was straight, her hands were still. Whatever moved in her did not show. She sat like a woman who owed nothing in that house, because she did not. The service ended. The village went out into the cold. There were kind words at the door, murmured. Careful. Mrs. So-and-so said she was sure Mrs. Sutcliffe would be the warmer for it. Eleanor thanked her and walked home alone across the green, her boots on the frozen grass, and she let herself into the quiet cottage where 3 books stood on the shelf. Now the 4 weeks began, and I want you to watch them with me closely. because everything that happened next happened without a raised voice, without a single denouncing word. Eleanor Sutcliffe never schemed. She never accused. Understand that. Her only power, the whole of it, was that she could read the arrangement she was caught in, and she could refuse it. And she began, very quietly, to refuse. The charity coal was carted round in the days after the reading. That was the way of it. A cart went from cottage to cottage, and the sacks were lifted off at the doors of the named, in daylight, where the neighbours could see the giving and the receiving both. It was, in its way, a second reading, a reading in coal instead of words. The cart came to Eleanor's door, but before it came, she had already sent for the coalman, the ordinary coalman who sold to anyone with the money, and on that same day, at her own door, in daylight, before whatever witnesses happened to be near, Eleanor Sutcliffe paid the coalman 9 shillings in cash for her winter coal, counted out into his hand. Coin by coin, and when the charity cart came with its sack, she met it at the door. She was courteous, she was entirely calm. She thanked the man for his trouble, and she declined the load. She said she was already supplied. She did not explain. She did not make a speech of it. She simply would not take it, and she was pleasant about it, and the cart went on. Now, no one could say a word against her. She had been perfectly polite. She had accused no one of anything. But the village is a small place, and the neighbours had seen the coalman's coin go into his hand, and they had seen the charity sack go back on the cart. And slowly, the ones who saw began to understand. She had stepped out of the transaction. She had made herself, on the matter of coal, a customer and not a case. She had paid, in daylight, so that she need not receive, in daylight. She said almost nothing at all. But the thing was done, and it could be read by anyone who cared to read it. Where did the 9 shillings come from? That is the next thing. Because Eleanor Sutcliffe had almost nothing. She had counted it at her table and known how little it was. So watch what she did. She took her husband's books, not the 3, the others. Thomas had gathered books all his life, the way a schoolmaster does, a shelf and more of them, some of real value to a man who knew what he was looking at. She wrote to a dealer in Lincoln, a man who bought such libraries, and in time he came out across the fen with his cart, and he went through Thomas's books with his spectacles down his nose, and he made her an offer for the lot. She sold them. All but 3. She kept exactly 3. The spelling primer, soft-covered, the copybook in Thomas's young fair hand, and the small dark testament. Those 3 she took down off the shelf and set apart before the dealer ever came, and those 3 were not for sale at any price, and she did not tell him why. The rest went on to his cart and away to Lincoln, and money came back the other way. Not a fortune, but money, her own, earned by giving up the thing she loved second best, to keep the thing she loved first. And then she did something the village found very strange. She let it be known, quietly, in the way things are let be known in a small place, that she would take children at her kitchen table and teach them their letters. For 6pence a week. Each there were the Pike children, 4 of them, of a family too poor and too far out on the fen to send them anywhere, but not too poor to find 6pence for the eldest and the next and the next. Susanna Pike was the eldest, and on a morning that week the 4 Pike children came across the frozen green to the schoolmaster's cottage, and they sat down at Eleanor Sutcliffe's kitchen table, and she opened the soft-covered spelling primer, and she began to teach. Do you see what she had made? The 3 kept books were not relics now. They were a schoolroom, the primer to sound the letters, the copybook to shape the hand, the testament to read from when the letters came together. Thomas's books teaching the fen's children, still with his widow's voice where his had been. And 4 6pences a week came in across that table, 2 shillings a week. Now count it as she counted it. 2 shillings a week is not much. But it is not charity received, It is work done. It is a wage. A woman who earns 2 shillings a week teaching 4 children their letters is not a case on a relief committee's list. She is a schoolmistress, a small one, a poor one, a dame school at a kitchen table. But a schoolmistress. She had turned herself, coin by 6-penny coin, from a recipient into a worker, and she had done it with her dead husband's 3 kept books and her own quick mind, and not one word of complaint to anyone. The village watched this too, and did not quite know what to make of it. It was odd. It was precise. It was the widow Sutcliffe doing something exact and deliberate that nobody had asked her to do. But no one yet saw the whole shape of it. No one yet stood back far enough to see what she was building, 6pence by 6pence, and what it was going to make impossible. Then, in the 4th week, Eleanor sat down at her table one evening after the children had gone home across the fen. And she wrote 3 letters. She wrote them in a fair hand, better than her husband's copybook. The first was to the diocesan chancellor at Lincoln. In it she set out, plainly and without heat, exactly how the reading worked. Not how it felt, how it worked. The mechanism of it, that the naming of recipients and the thanking of subscribers in one service, in a village where every name has a face, was not accountability, that it paid the subscribers in something the trust deed never mentioned and charged the poor for it in the same coin. She laid it out the way she would lay out a column of figures. Clear, cold, true, the 2nd letter was to 1 subscriber, the 3rd to another. I will not tell you yet what she said in those, only that they were not begging letters. They were not thank you letters. They were something else. She wrote all 3. She read them over once, by the light of the 1 candle she allowed herself now. And you, watching, you brace yourself here. You feel it coming. The denunciation. The letter to the Chancellor that pulls the whole custom down. The 2 subscribers, shamed by the widow's steady hand. You wait for her to strike. She did not post them. She folded the 3 letters, one after another, along their creases, and she opened the drawer of her table, and in that drawer were the pew rent receipts. 22 years of them. £1 4 shillings a year, paid every year in Thomas's careful keeping. She laid the 3 folded letters in the drawer on top of the receipts. And she closed it. She had understood something the letters could only have begged for. She had read her way to the end of the whole arrangement, past the anger, past the wish to be answered, to the one plain fact underneath all of it. And the letters, she saw, would only ask. They would put her back into the transaction. They would make her a petitioner again, this time for justice instead of coal, but a petitioner still, holding out her hand and waiting for the parish to decide. She would not hold out her hand. Not for coal, not for justice, not for anything. So she posted none of them. She put them in the drawer with the receipts of every pew rent her husband had ever paid, and she blew out the candle, and she went up to bed in the quiet cottage on the edge of the fen. She had decided something. You can feel that she has. She sat through that reading once, and she had worked out, to the last farthing, the price of sitting through it a 2nd time next November. And she had decided in that stillness that she would not pay it. Not the price, and not with a letter that only asked to be spared it. There was another way, a quieter way, a way that used nothing but her own 2 feet and her own straight back, and the one thing no committee could put on any list. She had not told a living soul what it was, and outside, over the black fen, the wind came down cold off the water, and it was not yet Advent. She was in church the following Sunday. Pew 9, near the back, paid. She did not arrive early, and she did not arrive late. She sat where Thomas Sutcliffe had sat for 22 years, and she listened to the sermon, and she did not meet anyone's eye with any purpose in it. She was simply there. Reverend Crandall noted this, in the vague, satisfied way a man notes that a difficult season has passed without incident. He had watched her face during the reading, and he had told himself afterward that it had gone better than he feared. She had not wept. She had not left. She had, in his private accounting, borne it with a good deal more grace than some. He did not see that bearing it and accepting it were two entirely different things. The Pike children came the next morning, and the morning after that. All four of them scrubbed into some approximation of tidiness by their mother, who had heard from the butcher's wife that Mrs. Sutcliffe was taking children at 6pence a week, and who had decided, on the spot, that Susanna and her 3 brothers would be among them. The kitchen table held the spelling primer open at the first lesson. The copybook was ruled and waiting. The Testament sat on the shelf and would come later when the letters were secure. Susanna was the quick one. She had her mother's watchful eyes, and she was 8 years old, and she already understood that whatever Mrs. Sutcliffe was teaching her was something she would carry out of this kitchen and use for the rest of her life. She sounded each letter with a serious attention that made the others follow suit, because Susanna's attention had that quality in it. Eleanor corrected, and waited, and corrected again. She did not rush them. 4 sixpences came in on Fridays, 1 shilling and 8pence a week. It was not a fortune. It was not meant to be a fortune. It was the specific amount required to buy her own coal, and her own flour, and her own candles, and to owe the parish nothing whatsoever in exchange for any of them. She went back to church the Sunday after that. And the Sunday after that. The vicar preached on the feeding of the 5,000. He observed afterward to the churchwarden over the vestry door that the autumn giving had been generously received this year. The churchwarden agreed. Neither man looked down the nave toward pew 9. There was no particular reason to. The first Sunday of Advent was 3 weeks away. She kept every Sunday. That was the thing the village would remember later, when it tried to explain her to itself. She kept them all. The 3 Sundays of Advent's approach came and went, and Eleanor Sutcliffe sat in pew number 9 each one of them. She wore her good dark dress, brushed and mended at the cuff. She sang the hymns in a plain true voice. She bowed her head at the confession, and lifted it at the absolution. And when the plate came round, she put something in it, a small coin, hers, earned. She owed the collection nothing either. But she gave to it, because giving and receiving were not the same act, and she had learned to feel the difference in her hands. Reverend Crandall noticed her there. He noticed her with a mild and passing satisfaction. Here was the widow, restored to her place, bearing the season with the grace he had always credited her. The coal had gone somewhere, he supposed. He had not troubled to ask where. The committee did its work, and the sacks went out and the winter was met, and the details of a sack of coal were not a vicar's concern. He said as much to the churchwarden. He said the autumn charity had been well received this year. Quietly received. No fuss, no complaint, no awkwardness at the vestry door. A good season, he said. The churchwarden agreed that it had been. Neither of them could see what Eleanor could see. That was the whole of it. She sat in her pew, and she held the entire arrangement in her head like a column of figures. 14 subscribers at a guinea a year. The coal. The flannel. The reading of the names after the sermon so the subscribers might know their charity was not wasted. She could total it. She could see the ledger of dignity underneath the ledger of coin, and she could see exactly what the parish paid out on the one to collect on the other. She had spent the autumn stepping out of that ledger, entry by entry. And now there was only one entry left. The pew. She thought about the pew a great deal in those weeks. Thomas had paid the rent on it for 22 years. £1 4 shillings a year, every year, near the back, but paid, always paid, in a hand that never once fell behind. The rent was paid now to Lady Day. The pew was hers to sit in. And a pew you have paid for and do not sit in is a strange and speaking thing in a small church. Everyone knows whose it is. Everyone can see it is empty. In a room where every name has a face and every pew has a family, An empty paid seat is a sentence written where the whole congregation must read it. She knew this. She had counted on nothing. She had schemed at nothing. She had only followed the figures to their end, and the figures ended here. The first Sunday of Advent came. It was a raw grey morning off the fen, the sort that gets into the joints of old buildings. The bell rang across the flat fields as it had rung for centuries. The village came in by twos and threes, stamping the cold from their boots in the porch. They took their places. Mrs. Fenwick came in her good dark coat and settled into the front where the subscribers sat. Edmund Hartley came and took his seat, 2 rows and a little across from pew number 9. The church filled the way it always filled, and pew number 9 was empty. Not draped, not marked, not closed off, simply empty. The paid seat of the schoolmaster's widow, with no widow in it. The morning light came through the plain glass and fell across the bare wood, and the wood held no one. Edmund Hartley saw it first because it was in his line of sight and had been for a year of Sundays. His eye went to it the way an eye goes to a gap where a tooth has been. He looked away. He looked back. It was still empty. Others saw it. A head turned, and then another. Nothing was said, of course. You do not speak in church, but a small stillness passed along the pews, the stillness of a room noticing a thing together and not yet knowing what to do with the noticing. Reverend Crandall went up to preach and did not see it at all. He was looking at his notes, and then at the middle distance, the way a man looks when he preaches. He gave his sermon on the coming of the light into the darkness. He was pleased with it. He came down, and the service went on and ended, and the people went out into the cold, and it was not until he was taking off his surplice in the vestry that the churchwarden mentioned, in a low and careful voice, that Mrs. Sutcliffe had not been in her place. Crandall paused with the surplice half over his head. Not been in her place, he said. Pew 9. Empty. She is unwell, perhaps, said the churchwarden. But he did not say it as a man who believed it. Crandall finished folding the surplice. He turned the thing over in his mind and found to his own faint surprise that it settled him rather than troubled him. Of course, he understood it now. She had gone. It was the obvious thing, and the obvious thing is always a comfort. She had felt the sting of the charity. He allowed himself to admit that much, privately in the safety of the empty vestry. She had felt it, and she had taken herself off, to the Wesleyans, most likely, across the fen at Gedney End, where they made much of the humble and asked no guinea of anyone. Or to her sisters, over in Boston. Or she had simply, quietly, slipped out of the parish altogether, the way the poor did when a place had grown too heavy to be borne, gone to lodge with kin and be a burden in some other town where her name had no history. He was, God forgive him, almost relieved. A difficulty had removed itself. The widow's face in the pew had been, if he was honest, a small weekly reproach he had not quite let himself feel. Now it was gone, and the reproach was gone with it, and he need not examine either. She had borne the season, and then she had withdrawn, and both, he told himself, were her own free choosing. He went home to his dinner and thought no more of pew number 9. But the village thought of it. The village thought of little else, in the low way that a village thinks, over hedges and at back doors and across the counter of the shop. Where had Mrs. Sutcliffe gone? That was the question that went round Nettlehome in the days after that first Advent Sunday. And the strange thing, the thing that would not lie down, was that it had no easy answer. Because she had not gone anywhere. The coalman knew it. He had been paid 9 shillings in coin at her own door not a month since, and he had carted coal to her again, and there she was, at home in her cottage with a good fire, thank you, and no charity sack about the place. The butcher's wife knew it. She had seen her at market on the Saturday, buying her £half of neck with money out of her own purse. The neighbours on either side knew it. They heard her every weekday morning through the wall, or saw the 4 Pike children go trotting up her path at 8:30, scrubbed and satchelled, Susanna in front with the primer under her arm. She had gone to the Wesleyans? She had not. Nobody had seen her cross the fen. She had gone to Boston. To her sister? She had not. There she was at the pump on Tuesday. She had left the parish in shame? She was in the middle of it, teaching its children their letters at her own kitchen table and taking 6pence a week from each of them for the doing of it. So where had she gone? It took the village a little while to arrive at the answer, because the answer was of an odd shape and did not match any of the shapes the village had ready. She had not left the parish, she had not left the village, she had not even left her own street. She had left one room, she had left the church, and she had left it not in a huff, not in a flounce, not with a word to anyone, but in the same quiet exact way she did everything now, the way you close an account you have finished with. They began to place her. That was the phrase that came, unbidden, to more than one of them. They began to place where she actually was, and where she actually was, every weekday, was a mile up the lane in her own kitchen, with 4 children and 3 books, doing work and being paid for it. And where she was every Sunday now was in that same cottage, gone to no church at all, neither the Vicar's nor the chapel's, keeping the day in her own house with her own testament, and owing her attendance to nobody who would read her name from a height. And slowly, over the raw short days toward Christmas, the meaning of the empty pew came up out of the wood of it and stood plain in front of them. She had not been driven out. She had not fled. Nobody had turned her from the door. She had sat through the reading of her name in November, with her eyes level and her back straight, and then she had gone home and worked out, to the shilling, what a second November like that would cost her. And she had declined to pay it. She had made herself, by her own labour, a woman there was no reason to put on any list, and in the doing of it she had emptied the one seat that could not be quietly filled or quietly explained. The empty pew was not grief. It was not flight. It was a ledger, balanced, set out in public where the sums could be checked. Susanna Pike, who was 8 and quick, and who heard everything the grown people said even when they thought she did not, asked her one morning why Mrs. Fenwick had looked at her so at market the day before. Looked at her hard, Susanna said, and then looked away. Eleanor considered the child's finger on the line of the primer. "Sound me that word again," she said. You hurried the middle of it. Susanna sounded it again, slower, she got it right. "There," said Eleanor, "you have it now," and she said nothing at all about Mrs. Fenwick, because Mrs. Fenwick was not the lesson. The winter went by. Christmas, and the deep cold of January, and the slow lengthening of February's light. The 4 children came every weekday morning and learned their letters, and 4 sixpences came in on Fridays, 1 shilling and 8pence a week, and it bought coal and flour and candles, and owed the parish nothing. Pew number 9 stayed empty Sunday upon Sunday. The village grew used to it and never quite got used to it, both at once. The way you do with a thing that reproaches you a little every time you see it. And the year turned all the way round again, as years do, to autumn, to November, to the season of the charity. The vestry met to arrange the November distribution, as it met every year. It met in the cold vestry room off the north side of the chancel, the room with the great iron banded parish chest against the wall, and the minute book laid open on the table, and a single small fire that never quite warmed the stone. Reverend Crandall sat at the head. The 2 churchwardens sat to either side. Mrs. Fenwick was there as chief subscriber in her good dark coat. Edmund Hartley was there as a subscriber and a vestryman both. The clerk was there with his pen. The clerk read the order of business. There were the usual items: the state of the churchyard wall, the account of the last distribution, subscriptions received, 14 at a guinea, coal bought, clothing bought, all in order. And then, item 4, the arrangement of the coming distribution and the reading of the recipients' names from the pulpit, according to the ancient custom of the charity. The clerk read item 4, and then there was a silence. It was not a planned silence. Nobody had agreed to it. It simply fell, the way the stillness had fallen in the church a year before. A whole roomful of people noticing the same thing at the same moment, and not one of them wanting to be the first to name it. The fire ticked. Somewhere out beyond the vestry door, the church stood cold and empty, and in it 2 rows from Edmund Hartley's seat. Pew number 9. It was one of the churchwardens who broke it. An older man, a farmer, not given to speeches. He had his hands flat on the table, and he looked at them while he spoke, and he said the thing plainly. "There is a pew in this church," he said, "that has been empty since Advent. And every man in this room knows why." Nobody answered him. There was nothing to answer. It was not a question. It was the sum, read out, of a year of Sundays. Reverend Crandall felt the room turn toward him, not with their bodies, but with their waiting. He was the vicar, the custom was the church's, and the church was his to speak for. He cleared his throat, and he defended it, because he believed in it, or had believed in it, and a man does not give up a belief in a cold room in front of his neighbours without first trying its weight. The reading of the names, he said, is a matter of accountability. The subscribers give of their means. It is no small thing, a guinea a year, given freely. They are entitled to know their gifts are bestowed where there is real need, and not squandered. The reading is how the charity renders its account to those who fund it. It has been so for longer than any of us. It is not unkindness. It is honesty. He heard the words go out of his mouth, and he heard them, for the first time in all the years he had said them, come back thin. They came back thin because the room they went out into was a room that had been looking at an empty pew for a 12-month. Every argument he made for the custom, the accountability, the honesty, the subscribers' due, every one of them was answered, before he finished it, by the plain fact of that bare seat beyond the wall. She had rendered her account too. She had rendered it in coin at the coalman's request, and in sixpences at her kitchen table, and in an empty paid pew that no subscriber could ever be publicly thanked in front of again. Her honesty had cost her nothing that was not hers to spend. Theirs had cost her, once, in front of the whole congregation, everything they had no right to take. He knew it as he sat there. He did not say it. But he stopped speaking sooner than he had meant to, and let the sentence trail, and looked down at the minute book. Mrs. Fenwick sat very upright in her good dark coat. She had come to this meeting as she came to all of them, secure in the shape of her own goodness. She gave conspicuously, and she was thanked conspicuously, by name, from the front pew where the giving could be seen. That was the arrangement, and the arrangement had suited her all her life. And now she understood, in that cold room, that the arrangement had broken and could not be mended. The thanks she was accustomed to receive were thanks she could no longer be seen receiving. For the person she had been most conspicuously seen to give to, the schoolmaster's widow, the very best object of a visible charity, respectable, literate, fallen through no fault of her own, had declined to be given to, had taught 4 small children their letters rather than be named a second time from that pulpit. The whole splendid machinery of Mrs. Fenwick's benevolence had depended on their being a grateful poor to stand in the light of it, and one of them had walked out of the light and taken a piece of it with her, and everyone in the parish had watched her go. Mrs. Fenwick said nothing. There was a tightness about her mouth. She looked at the fire and not at the window. And Edmund Hartley. Edmund Hartley had sat, every Sunday for a year, in a seat from which he could see pew number 9. He was a plain, decent man. He had subscribed to the charity because it was a Christian thing to do, and because a corn factor in a small place likes to be known for the Christian things he does, and he had never once, until this last year, examined whether the 2 reasons sat comfortably together. The empty pew had made him examine it. Every Sunday he had run through, in his own mind, Over the months, every way there was to explain that pew to himself, and one by one they had failed him. She had not gone anywhere. She was not ungrateful. She had paid her own coalman before witnesses. She had done nothing but decline, quietly to be shamed, and had made her living honestly in the declining, and he had put his name, year on year, to the thing that shamed her. He had had a year to find a way to keep his subscription and keep his peace, and he had not found one. When Crandall's defence trailed off, and the room sat in its cold silence, Edmund Hartley spoke. He did not make a speech. He was not a speech-making man. He said one thing, flat and low, and he said it to the clerk, that it might go where it needed to go. "Enter it in the book," he said, "that I withdraw my subscription. I'll not put my name to another reading." The clerk looked at the vicar. The vicar did not stop him. So the clerk dipped his pen and wrote it into the minute book, in the plain language of the vestry, that Mr. Edmund Hartley, corn factor, had this day withdrawn his annual subscription to the Nettlehome Clothing and Coal Charity. One line, no protest, no sermon of his own, just his name, coming off a list, entered into the record in ink. And as he sat back, his eye went, as it had gone 100 Sundays, to the window and the cold church beyond it, and the empty pew he could not see from there, but knew was there. Every man in the room, at least once before the meeting ended, let his eyes go the same way. To the window, to the pew, to the sentence she had written and gone home from. She was not in the room. She had said nothing. She had not written to the Chancellor. She had not written to Mrs. Fenwick or to Edmund Hartley. The 3 letters were still in her drawer, folded, atop the pew rent receipts, unposted, and now never to be posted. She had begged no one for anything, and denounced no one for anything. She had simply stopped being in the place where the humiliation was collected, and the place could not go on as it was without her in it. At that same hour, a mile up the lane, Eleanor Sutcliffe sat at her kitchen table with the fire going and the 3 books upon the boards. The spelling primer, soft-covered, worn softer now by a year of small fingers. The copybook in Thomas's young fair hand that she used still to show the children how a letter ought to be made. And on the shelf, the small dark testament with its tiny print that had come down at last, now the household was secure, and taken its turn in the lessons. Susanna Pike had the primer open in front of her. She was sounding out a word, a long one, a hard one, and she came to the middle of it and hurried, the way she always hurried the middle of a hard word. "Slower," said Eleanor. She put her own finger under the line, beside the child's. "You have the beginning of it and the end of it. It's the middle you're afraid of. Don't hurry past the thing you're afraid of. Sound it." Susanna sounded it. Slowly, letter by letter, all the way through the middle she feared, and out the other side. She got it whole. "There," said Eleanor, "that's yours now. Nobody can take that back out of your head." She had no notion, and would have taken no interest if she had, that a mile off in a cold room a man was at that moment lifting his name off a list rather than put it to another reading of hers. The vestry was not her concern. It never had been. Her concern was the child's finger on the line, and the word got whole, and the 6pence on Friday, and the coal paid for, and the day her own. The 2 things happened in the same hour. The custom falling in the cold vestry, and the child learning her word at the warm table. The worthy at peace and earning. The machinery of shame come to pieces in her absence. She never lifted her head to watch it go. The following autumn, the vestry could not find a way to defend the thing again, and so it changed it. There was no grand vote, no ringing resolution. There was only a quiet alteration in the order of business, entered in the same plain ink as everything else. It was agreed that the recipients of the Clothing and Coal Charity should no longer be read by name from the pulpit. Only the accounts of the charity would be published thereafter. The subscriptions received, and the coal and clothing bought, and the sums balanced. The charity would render its account in figures, not in names. What it had done to Eleanor Sutcliffe it would not, from that year, be able to do to anyone. That was the whole of the change. A parish that had published its recipients became a parish that published only its accounts. 2 ways of keeping a charity honest, and the parish moved, without saying so, from the first to the second. And there was not a man on the vestry who would ever stand up and say that a widow's empty pew had moved it. But it had. Everyone knew it had, and no one said it, and both of those were true at once, the way things are in a small place. Reverend Crandall preached the following Advent to a full and warm church. He preached again on the light coming into the darkness. He did not look, as he preached, at pew number 9. He had trained himself out of looking at it. It was, he told himself, simply a pew that a family no longer used, and there were others like it. And a man cannot go through his life reading sentences into empty seats. He believed this as far as he could make himself believe it, which was not quite all the way. Mrs. Fenwick subscribed still. She gave her guinea as she had always given it. But she was thanked now only in a column of figures in the published account, a subscription received, 1 guinea among the others. No name read from a height, no head to incline in the front pew to be seen inclining. She gave, and it was recorded, and that was all. The light she had liked to stand in had been put out, and she went on giving in the ordinary dark like everybody else, and if it galled her, she never said. Edmund Hartley's cottage pew and Eleanor Sutcliffe's paid pew stood 2 rows apart, as they had always stood. His had a family in it of a Sunday. Hers was empty still. But they were, both of them, at last, simply pews. Not a sentence and its reader, not the scene giver and the named receiver, just wood, and the light off the fen coming through the plain glass, and no ledger written in either of them any longer. And on the kitchen table a mile up the lane, the 3 books lay worn a little softer each year. The primer, the copybook, the small dark testament. There was a 5th child at the table now, a little one, come to learn her letters at 6pence a week, like the 4 before her finger going along the line under Eleanor's, hurrying the middle of the hard words, and being told, slowly, not to hurry past the thing she was afraid of. Eleanor Sutcliffe never said a word to any of them. Not to the vicar, not to the subscribers, not to the vestry, not to the Chancellor at Lincoln, whose letter still lay folded in her drawer. She made no speech and laid no charge and asked no pardon. She simply stopped being in the room where the humiliation was collected, and it turned out the room could not go on collecting it without her sitting in it to be collected from. She read the whole of the thing when nobody thought a schoolmaster's widow could read anything but a primer, and then she closed the account and went home and taught the children instead. That is the whole of it. A pew paid 22 years and left empty, a name that would not be read again, because she made sure there was no reason left to read it. The quietest possible answer to the loudest possible shame. If there is a church in your own town with a pew like that, in it, empty and paid and speaking, or a charity that still reads its names out where the giving can be watched, I would like to know where you are. Tell me the name of your city, and I'll read every one.